Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from Spain, where the daily death count from COVID-19 has risen by 551, taking the tally to over 19,100. Germany has recorded the highest daily death toll of 315, while Iran has reported 92 new deaths. The US has reported a record 2,492 deaths in a day, bringing the tally to almost 31,000. The global death toll has now crossed 137,000 with over 2 million infections. More in this report.
The pandemic that has brought the entire world to its knees is devastating the US, killing an increasing number of people each day. But President Donald Trump insists the worst is over and says some states will reopen this month. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says it regrets Trump's decision to pull funding for the agency and call for world unity against coronavirus.
We regret the decision of the President of the United States to order a hold in funding to the World Health Organization. With support from the people and government of the United States, WHO works to improve the health of many of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people.
Elsewhere, German Chancellor Angela Merkel plans to slowly ease restrictions while keeping social distancing rules in place till 3rd May. Germany has recorded the highest daily death toll of 315, increasing the total count to over 3,500 with 130,450 infection cases so far. The UK, on the other hand, says it is too soon to begin thinking about the next steps as the pandemic in the country is reaching the peak.
Our view is that it's probably reaching the peak overall, and that's what the flattening shows. I think it's important, and I'm saying this because new data will come out presumably tomorrow. My expectation would be that the number of deaths may well go up because there has been after every weekend.
Over in South Korea, life has begun to return to normalcy as recoveries outweigh new infections. The country once had the second largest outbreak in the world.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 17 people have died from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to 124. The health ministry said over 1,600 people have recovered from the deadly virus across the country. The ministry said 520 new infections were reported since yesterday, bringing the total number of cases to 6,505. It said 58% of the infections are local, while the remaining 42% have a history of foreign travel. Moving on, at least 24 Rohingya Muslims have starved to death on a ship stranded in the Bay of Bengal for weeks. Over 750,000 Muslim minority members fled to Bangladesh after the 2017 massacre by Myanmar's army. Bangladesh Coast Guard officials say they rescued over 390 others from the illegal vessel trying to reach Malaysia. The officials said the refugees were at sea for about 2 months. It is unclear whether the refugees had left from Bangladesh or Myanmar. Some reports said the boat had been turned back by Malaysia because of the coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, Malaysian police said several boats were trying to reach the country's shores and monitoring had been stepped up. China has rejected U.S. allegations that it conducted secret low-level underground nuclear test explosions. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Beijing is committed to a moratorium on nuclear tests. Zhao said China has been actively fulfilling commitments to treaties on arms control and said false U.S. accusations are not worth refuting. Earlier, the State Department said China may have secretly set off a low-level underground nuclear test despite an international pact. Meanwhile, the US also accused Russia of carrying out a test of an anti-satellite missile, saying such activity threatens American assets in space. Moving on to Russia, which says the surrendering militants have revealed that the US is planning to sabotage oil and transport facilities in Syria. Russian Reconciliation Center Chief Oleg Zhuravlev said a group of 27 militants have surrendered to the Syrian government army. Zhuravlev said fighters were imparted training at a U.S. military base and were then tasked to target Syrian facilities. This comes as Russia and Syria called on the international community to exert pressure on the US for lifting sanctions on Damascus. In a statement, the Syrian and the Russian Coordination Committee said US curbs are aimed at exterminating people of a whole country. Meanwhile, the US says 11 vessels of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy came dangerously close to its Navy ships in Persian Gulf. The hostility between the two countries are at its peak since the US unilaterally pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal. The US Navy said Iranian vessels approached 6 US military ships during integration operations in international waters. It said at one point, the vessels came within 10 yards of the US Coast Guard cutter Maui. The Navy said the US ships issued several warnings through bridge-to-bridge radio and blasts from the ship's horns. Iranian authorities have not commented on the incident as yet. Israel's President Reuven Rivlin has given Parliament the mandate to form a coalition government. In a tweet, Rivlin said he hopes the lawmakers can form a majority to prevent fourth elections. Rivlin's decision comes after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his rival Benny Gantz failed to meet the deadline to form a unity government. President had given a 2-day extension in the negotiation period to Gantz, which ended last night. According to the Constitution, the Parliament now has to nominate a candidate to become Prime Minister in 21 days. He would then have 14 days to form a government. Failure to do so will automatically dissolve the Parliament and trigger a snap election. In South Korea, the party of President Moon Jae-in has won a decisive victory in parliamentary elections held yesterday. With nearly all votes counted, Moon's Democratic Party won 163 of 300 seats in the National Assembly. Ruling party's sister group, the Platform Party, has won 17 seats, giving the government a total of 180 seats. National Election Commission says the conservative opposition United Future Party and its smaller sister party have won 103 seats. Meanwhile, Tai Yong-ho has become the first ever North Korean defector to win a constituency seat in South Korea. National Election Commission says due to COVID-19, strict safety and social distancing measures were in place for the vote. To negotiate the post-Brexit trade deal, the UK and the European Union have agreed to hold 3 more rounds of talks. UK's chief negotiator David Frost and European Commission's chief negotiator Michel Barnier discussed the progress in a video conference. The rounds of talks will be held on 20th of April, 11th of May and 1st of June. The joint statement said all the major areas of divergence and convergence have been identified. It also said the goal is to make a real and tangible progress in the negotiations by June. Meanwhile, the IMF has urged the UK and the EU to extend trade talks period amid coronavirus. 2 major parliamentary parties, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, have approved an outline framework on a new Irish government. It is the first time that the 2 rivals of the Irish Civil War have reached an accord to form a coalition government. Economic recovery in the wake of the coronavirus crisis leads the joint policy document. The framework document said 2 parties, which have swapped powers since Irish independence in 1921, were committed to working together. It said parties will establish a unit at Prime Minister's office to work for a consensus on a united Ireland. Fianna Fáil emerged as the largest party in the terms of seats following the February elections. Greece has transferred a dozen unaccompanied children from overcrowded migrant camps to Luxembourg. The minors belong to camps on the islands of Lesbos, Chios and Samos. Another group of 50 children is likely to fly from Athens to Germany on Saturday, while 20 more will head to Switzerland later. Athens hopes to relocate some 1,600 unaccompanied minors amid concerns over the impact of coronavirus on the vulnerable groups. Over 5,000 migrant children from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq and African countries currently languish in Greece. Ukraine says its government forces and the pro-Russian separatists in the Donbas region have started this year's first prisoner swap. In a statement, the president's office said Ukraine will take back 19 of its citizens from a checkpoint on the contact line. The statement said President Volodymyr Zelensky is complying with the agreements reached during the Normandy summit in December 2019. Zelensky's office said negotiations were also ongoing for the release of Ukrainians held in Russia. The Donbas conflict has killed more than 13,000 people since 2014. Turkey has released the first batch of prisoners after ratifying a penal reform law to stem the spread of COVID-19 in jails. The state media says the parliament passed the law on Tuesday by 270 to 51 votes. It said authorities released some 650 prisoners after necessary procedures by gendarmerie forces. The law excludes prisoners convicted for sex and drug crimes, first-degree murder, violence against women, and terror acts. It enables house arrest for some inmates over 65, women who have children aged 6 and under, and six prisoners. On Monday, Justice Minister confirmed 17 cases of coronavirus in 5 open prisons, while 3 inmates have died from the virus. Turkey has confirmed over 1,500 deaths from COVID-19 so far. A third of nearly 2,000 sailors aboard a French aircraft carrier have tested positive for COVID-19. Paris says 668 sailors from Charles de Gaulle and escort vessels in its battle group are confirmed to have the virus. The Defense Ministry said 31 crew members were being treated in the hospital, with 1 in intensive care. Last week, France decided to bring Charles de Gaulle home 10 days early from a deployment in the Atlantic after crew members showed virus symptoms. The carrier, which had helicopters and fighter jets on board, were accompanied by the 2 frigates. Sailors from Charles de Gaulle's, one of the frigates, and pilots who returned aircraft to their respective bases are all placed in isolation for 14 days. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she will take a 20% pay cut for the next 6 months amid the economic impact of coronavirus. She says ministers in her government and public service chief executives will also take the same pay cuts. Economic activity in New Zealand is at a standstill as the country undertakes one of the strictest lockdowns globally. The government has forecast joblessness to surge because of the global and the domestic slowdown. So far, New Zealand has recorded over 1,400 cases of COVID-19 with 9 deaths.
Ministers and public service chief executives will take a 20% pay cut for the next 6 months, as we acknowledge New Zealanders who are reliant on wage subsidies, taking pay cuts and losing their jobs as a result of COVID-19's global pandemic.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The Indian authorities have stopped COVID-19 testing of potentially infected citizens in occupied Kashmir. Local media says the development came after officials diverted valley-bound kids to another region. The local medics told media the valley was supposed to get 5,000 kits urgently, but delivery was diverted midway. They said the halt in supply has forced hospitals to stop lifting swabs from suspected COVID-19 cases in the valley. Earlier, doctors said it is impossible for them to tackle with pandemic due to communications and internet blockade. The occupied territory has been under Indian curfew and clampdown for the last 256 days. The UN has backed Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan's call for global initiative for debt relief to developing countries. Meanwhile, Pakistan has been included in the group of countries eligible for debt relief announced by the G20 countries. UN Chief Spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said Khan's initiative echoes the Secretary General's own position. He said Antonio Guterres believes debt relief must be, and Zarif called his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi to express gratitude. Zarif said Beijing sent anti-epidemic goods and medical experts to Iran. He said China has condemned US sanctions on Tehran, which has hindered the country's fight against the deadly virus. The foreign minister said they also discussed bilateral partnership and the peace process in Afghanistan. Earlier, Zarif condemned the US for halting funding to WHO, saying the world is learning what Iran has experienced all along. The US has asked China for transparency and information sharing to fight against coronavirus pandemic. State Department spokeswoman Morgan Ortega said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo held a telephone conversation with Beijing's top diplomat. She said Pompeo talked about the importance of US-China relations. She said China's facilitation of medical supply exports to the US is crucial. For his part, Yang Jiechi told Pompeo he hoped Washington would meet Beijing halfway and focus on cooperation. The two countries have been at loggerheads over the pandemic. US Senator Elizabeth Warren says she endorses Joe Biden for president. This gives the presumptive Democratic frontrunner another high-profile backing from one of his former rivals. Warren, a progressive leader who ended her own bid for the White House last month, released a video announcing her support. Earlier this week, Senator Bernie Sanders and former President Barack Obama also endorsed Biden. Warren said in this moment of crisis, it's important that the next president restores Americans' faith in the effective government. However, she said she does not agree with Biden all the time, but praises his willingness to adapt. Biden has adopted Warren's plan on bankruptcy, on which the two rivals had clashed over in the past. NATO defense ministers say they will work to counter the spread of disinformation amid the coronavirus pandemic. In a statement, the US Department of Defense said NATO will maintain a strong deterrence and defense posture to preserve alliance security. The statement emphasized on the importance of countering misinformation from both state and non-state actors. The department said many people are using the pandemic to spread false and harmful narratives. The International Vaccine Institute says it is hopeful for progress in development of an anti-coronavirus vaccine. In an interview, Director General Jerome Kim said it is a remarkable achievement to have human trials around the globe in 2 months. More in this report.
Kim said vaccines, in general, are hard to develop, but the global focus on one target can achieve positive results. He said global cooperation is required to vaccinate a major section of the world population.
It takes between 5 and 10 years to develop a vaccine, but these are not usual circumstances. So scientists around the world are hoping that we are able to prove that a vaccine works in 12 to 18 months.
Meanwhile, the University Hospital of Wales in Cardiff hopes to offer the treatment as part of a study within a month.
The International Monetary Fund says economic growth in Asia will ground to a halt in 2020 for the first time in 60 years due to COVID-19 pandemic. This comes after IMF warned the global economy will face a worst recession since the Great Depression in 1930s. In a blog, the monetary body said the drop in growth will be far worse than the global financial crisis. In its report, Fiscal Monitor 2020, IMF said economic fallout of COVID-19 will cause a major increase in fiscal deficits and public debt ratios. The managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, said the fund is looking to triple its concessional financing to help the poorest countries.
What we have seen is central banks providing ample liquidity, $8 trillion of fiscal measures. So our message is spend as much as you can, but keep the receipts.
European stock markets are trading higher as countries begin easing lockdown measures to revive stalled economies. Investor sentiments have picked up ahead of Eurozone industrial production data for February due to be released later in the day. Frankfurt's DAX has gained over 1%. CAC 40 in Paris is trading over 1%. London's FTSE 100 has surged marginally. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the losses, closing over 1% lower after index heavyweight Fanuc shares declined over 2.5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost over 0.5%, while Shanghai Composite gained ground. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained about 2% after plummeting due to demand slump. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.